I think it's fair to acknowledge that there's a lot of apprehension surrounding the Pokemon gaming space, but I'm here to say Pokemon Legends Z-A is easily the most ambitious game in the entire franchise, and in my opinion, the best by a long shot. And coming from a studio like Game Freak, that can mean a lot of good, but let's not kid ourselves, they're not exactly the most proficient game studio in the world, so there's a fair share of bad as well. I've been marathoning the game since it unlocked for me early last Wednesday at the time of recording, and have formed a lot of thoughts on its pros and cons, and thought it'd be useful to share them so you can judge for yourself whether the game could be worth it to you. For me, Pokemon Legends Z-A was a very welcome surprise that I am thoroughly enjoying in ways I haven't enjoyed a Pokemon game in my entire life. And I've been consistently playing without falling off once since the franchise's American debut. But I do have a decent amount of problems with it, and those good and bad thoughts, for better or worse, are informed by those past Pokemon games. In my opinion, for the vast majority of Pokemon games, they have a general positive trend toward improvement in various ways, including Scarlet and Violet, despite its flaws. However, that's within the context of Pokemon games only, not a judgment call on how they actually compare to the field of gaming overall. I have never played a Pokemon game that I would consider to be a great game, just good for a Pokemon game. And I'll go even further to say, even with that grading curve for relative quality, Pokemon games were absolutely inconsistent in the Switch era from the moment it started. Now, if we fast forward to the start of the Switch 2 era, Legends Z-A is a much better start to this generation of consoles than Pokemon Let's Go was for Switch. And it's made even better when you realize how much of a breath of fresh air it is after Gen 9, especially given the fact that Z-A's frame rate actually matters for more reasons than immersion and vibes this time around. So if they fumbled, a lot more people would feel it and be angry than there were for a menu sim dropping frames. Not just that, it was a relief to learn that the Switch version of Pokemon Legends Z-A didn't turn out the way a lot of people expected relative to current gen. Despite what people assumed about the Switch 2 version of Legends Z-A being borderline required to enjoy the game up until it came out, it's actually completely valid to enjoy the game on Switch 1 as well. And I have personally experienced it myself to confirm. In fact, I spent the first 6 hours or so of my personal playthrough on the Switch version, so I can personally attest to Legends Z-A's quality on Switch 1. And this game isn't just a straightforward return to status quo. It has continued the quality of life improvements that Pokemon games before it have become known for drip feeding. Things like box management have added features and refinements, although they could stand to continue to add more, even if it's to simply catch up to themselves in apps like Home and Go. There's an even more streamlined approach to Pokemon learning moves, as is needed given this game's design, but would also be a worthwhile improvement for any Pokemon game. And they consolidated the Pokemon Center experience, although I'll say it can be annoying needing to scroll past the heal option when you're there to shop. It is also worth noting features and improvements introduced in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet return in this game as well, namely bulk sell, which to me is extremely promising for the future of Pokemon given their history of introducing and rescinding features, especially in between mainline to spin-off game. Legends Z-A feels a lot closer to offering the full Pokemon experience with an experimental spin, and it's more than just a slight improvement to Arceus's attempt at doing the same. I'd say one of the biggest strengths of Legends Z-A is how good it feels to have an entire game to learn and discover after years of slight iterations with a different coat of paint. And unlike the previous Legends game, the introduction of these new exciting changes to the formula don't come at the expense of every other valuable thing the mainline games have to offer. And before anyone says it, I am aware that Game Freak claims to view Legends games as mainline games, and in a lot of ways that is reflected in the product. However, it's disingenuous to pretend Legends games haven't set the expectation of having a decreased scale in exchange for increased scope. Legends Z-A in particular has gotten back some of the meat on the bones that mainline games had to offer, and that, to me, is a drastic improvement over Legends Arceus specifically. On that note, let's take a look at how Pokemon Legends Z-A directly addresses problems with Legends Arceus. Pokemon Legends Z-A's setting is the subject of much of the online discourse due to being limited to one city, and secondarily, in terms of the amount of people that care, it taking place in the modern day as opposed to being a time period piece like Arceus was. I'll get to Lumiose city thoughts in a later chapter of the video, but in regards to the time period, I'll say Legends Arceus used its time period as an excuse to gut the scale of the game by a lot. Like, the concept of Pokemon trainers was new, so there was no one to battle, and since there was no one to battle, all of the gameplay opportunities related to battling were omitted from the experience. In lieu of trainer battles, Arceus instead dove deep into the Pokemon catching experience, and that aspect of the game was fun, but by its very nature, the collection of Pokemon alone is finite, and that becomes glaringly obvious with the decreased scale of the game leading to a Pokedex with a little over half the usual size. Conversely, Z-A centers Pokemon battles in a way that no game has before it. So you get the campaign, you get side missions, you get research tasks, you even get the same catching mechanics, with the only real change being the removal of the Safari Zone-like mud and bait system used to make it easier to catch Pokemon outside of battle in Arceus. And not only does it retain those elements from Arceus, it increases the overall quantity of story content with significantly more story missions than Arceus had, and the addition of actual post-game content that doesn't strictly amount to various boss rush options. And on the topic of boss battles, they were terribly executed in Pokemon Legends Arceus. They unironically felt like N64 era boss battles with terrible hit detection, poorly thought out recovery frames, and boring boss patterns as well as phases. Legends Z-A, on the other hand, has exceedingly fun boss battles. I didn't fight a single boss that I didn't enjoy, and the final boss is amongst my favorite boss fights in any game ever, which I didn't expect to be able to say about a Pokemon game. Pokemon Legends Arceus is truly one of my least favorite Pokemon games of all time, so trust me when I say it deeply surprised me that Legends Z-A has become my all-time favorite, and it's not close. That said, I am aware of the online perception of Legends Arceus. I know plenty of people love it, although even that I'd challenge from most people given how quickly player activity plummeted for that game seemingly overnight, and I've never really seen it bounce back from there. But I digress. I empathize with the reason. Arceus lives on vibes, and while in a lot of ways vibes are a distant second to actual gameplay for me, I do acknowledge they are a factor in a game's quality. So let's talk about vibes, because that's where Legends Z-A does admittedly start to show some flaws. The elephant in the room and go-to complaint of online grifters at the moment is the visuals of Pokemon Legends Z-A. I am a multi-console owner. I have always been a multi-console owner for my entire life. I am aware this game is far from contemporary, even as a Nintendo Switch game. That said, this game is also far from being this abhorrent thing to look at that could have been played on a GameCube. That line of attack is classic online hyperbolic criticism that people resort to because their vocabulary is bad and they don't actually know how to critique things. That said, Pokemon Legends Z-A could absolutely stand to be better stylized graphically. If Game Freak isn't proficient enough at managing their assets or whatever the cause actually is, that I guarantee is more complex than the ironically lazy and trite assertion of laziness or greed, I would imagine it would be a smart move to more aggressively cel shade Pokemon games moving forward. The way they seem to add higher quality shaders to the Pokemon themselves than the environment would be a lot less jarring if the whole game just straight up looked like the anime. As they stand right now, Pokemon games give me Twilight Princess vibes when they should give Wind Waker. And I get it, I'm sure they think veering closer to realism would feel more like an upgrade from a game to game basis. But I genuinely believe for the long-term health of Pokemon discourse, both inside and out of the community, if Pokemon games look like the games I've been showing on your screen for the past few seconds, they would be a lot better looked at by everyone involved. Many would likely even call them gorgeous. When's the last time you heard that about a Pokemon game? I'd argue never. The second biggest issue, according to online controversy, would have to be the lack of voice acting. And like the graphics, I ultimately agree with the idea that Pokemon games should have this. However, my reasons are a lot more nuanced than the nonsensical concept of the chronology of outside developers having any tangible impact on a given producer's ability or desire to do something, or even the idea that an entertainment company is under any obligation to commit to using its resources in any ways outside of what it thinks is necessary. In other words, it being 2025 has absolutely no bearing on whether voice acting is something Game Freak wants to include, and the reason is more than likely weighed against tradition and fan expectations rather than ability, funds, or even time. And I'm not going to complain either way, because they're not my mom. I don't feel like me buying a product from them is the same thing as me getting good grades and getting rewarded for it, or getting a snack because my siblings got a snack when I didn't. Obviously, as consumers, we have the right to decide whether their allocation of time and resources results in a product we think is worth buying. But people lose me when they start the parasocial verbiage when talking about this topic. If you don't like what they're doing, the answer is to not buy it, not to pretend that they owe you anything because after the fact that the product was presented to you, you bought it and felt like it wasn't worth what you paid. And now I say that, but it is worth considering that while it is a fact that Game Freak and all other parties involved with the creation of Pokemon games are for-profit corporations, they are comprised of people at every level of the ladder that have thoughts and opinions that culminate in what we do and don't get. Pokemon fans argue about what makes a Pokemon game all day, every day. And if you don't think those same arguments are happening internally within Game Freak, you very clearly haven't been a part of a shared creative endeavor of any notable scale, let alone one as big as Pokemon with as much baggage as Pokemon. All of that said, I do think the conclusion they keep coming to in regards to voice acting has officially become a bad one and not just a difference of opinion. And that's because voice acting in Pokemon Legends Z-A wouldn't just improve a nebulous thing like vibes and atmosphere. It would improve the gameplay. Traditionally, in Pokemon games, our only way of engaging with them was through text. You actively need to read to attack. Your opponent needs to be doing the same. And all of that is communicated to each player simultaneously in text. Legends Z-A changes this. You no longer need to parse through layers of text to attack. And you don't even really have the luxury to, even if you wanted to, because attacks are now at the press of a button. Two, with the targeting if you want to be pedantic, as I'm sure many will. Both you and your opponent will be constantly moving around the field and pressing various buttons. It's obviously possible to read what's going on, or at least glance and get the gist of what's going on, but it would be a lot more intuitive to play if instead of the sidebar notifying you of various attacks coming from various threats, you hear the trainers verbally announcing moves they plan to do. That to me is a much stronger justification for voice acting. I feel similarly about identifying Pokemon in the world. It's way easier and natural to hear a voice say Pikachu and know there's a Pikachu somewhere than it is to hear its cry and immediately come to that conclusion. I can only hope they understand that if they plan to continue to improve and, more importantly, modernize the Pokemon experience. Secondarily, if you're going to do voice acting for all of that, you might as well throw in voice acting for the story. But I feel way more personally invested in the gameplay advantages of voice acting than I do, again, the vibes. To continue with the vibes though, they do get a lot right in this area as well. Like, it was immediately apparent to me that the relationship between trainer and Pokemon feels more tangible than it ever has. Getting tea with my Pokemon in the photo mode as a whole is a huge value add when it comes to this element of Pokemon, and it makes the game feel that much more alive and immersive. And that's made better by the fact that character customization is the best it's ever been. That's not to say it's perfect. There's still only like 2.5 black hair options, but it's definitely a huge step forward in the clothes department at the very least in particular. And on the topic of characters, the NPCs have improved a lot in this game as well. Again, it's not perfect. They could still definitely improve on how NPCs engage with the world generally, but it is an improvement. And I'll add that their designs overall have also benefited from the increased character customization and the increased variety in clothing options. And a result of this is trainer classes coming a long way. It feels a lot less like I'm battling the same 5 people with one of 3 different hair colors to shift between. The improved character customization absolutely inspired them to up their game in this regard. Whichever way you slice it, and that is something I appreciate, as well as something I hope to see continue into the future, and not as some one-off thing they included to better sell the Lumiose Paris Fashion Week vibes. Speaking of which, the final boss of online Z-A complaints, Lumiose City, has much more depth than any other town in Pokemon history. But I agree, one city isn't enough to facilitate a full Pokemon game, even if it does work here. And even in the context of Lumiose as it exists in this game itself, adding the roller skates from X and Y would have been a perfect addition given the absence of ride Pokemon, which I'll add was an omission that does make sense given the size of this game and the way you traverse it as is. I personally enjoy Lumiose as it's presented in Legends Z-A. I think they gave it a reasonable amount of variety as far as cities are concerned, as someone that has lived in and around cities my entire life. My hope is this approach to the city gets applied to the towns and cities at various sizes for future games, because there is a lot to do and the city is very well considered. It's just hard to inject any one city with the sense of adventure that an entire region could offer. I will say a major complaint I do have with Lumiose as it exists in Z-A, even though I think it makes thematic and narrative sense for the setting, is having Pokemon segmented into glorified zoos as a downgrade from open world Pokemon, which again could have been avoided if the Legends series didn't exist and they just ripped the band-aid off and introduced these gameplay changes to mainline games. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It bears repeating that catching Pokemon in Legends Z-A benefits from the approach to catching in Legends Arceus, but the biggest W in my opinion is it does this without ever centralizing the mechanic in the same way that game did. I'm down to complete a Pokedex. I've done so without fail for several games in a row within a week of their release, including this one. Despite that, when I play Pokemon, there's nothing in me that desires to catch tens of every single Pokemon in the game. Now, Z-A definitely wants you to do a bit of that kind of foolishness, but that requirement has been drastically tuned down, and best yet, it has returned to being mostly optional as far as the main story of the game is concerned. Legends Arceus locked progression behind Pokedex completion benchmarks. Legends Z-A makes that a post-game thing that you can roll credits without coming close to fully engaging with if you so choose. And that's still not the best way to handle it. If it were up to me, I would prefer for there to be more optional tasks to reach the max level requirement. To some degree, I think it's fair of a game to expect some level of engagement in what it has to offer to complete it. Like, I think a minimum battle requirement is reasonable in a game that's literally about Pokemon battling. I do think the 1000 battle requirement in this game is too far though. I think the same is true for catching Pokemon. Requiring you build a stable of Pokemon of every type is reasonable. 50 of each, while better than Legends Arceus' requirement in my opinion, is still too much. I think the game should subsidize these tasks with options that better fit how people want to play, because games should be fun, not tedious. It's leisure, not a chore. And that brings me to what I think is another major strong point of Legends Z-A. Despite my criticism of the requirements to complete the game when it comes to the base of the game, what most people are concerned with and will see, the illusion of choice is less of an illusion in this game thanks to the increased depth and attention to detail in most aspects of it. Pokemon fans are notorious for how vastly different they view Pokemon and the strengths it has. I think Legends Z-A is the closest a Pokemon game has come to providing something that every kind of fan can get lost in. There are a lot of new Mega Evolution designs that have been added for people in it for catching and training new Pokemon. Lore fans have plenty of new and expanded lore to marinate on. Shiny hunting is the best it's ever been for various reasons, not the least of which being the system implemented to lessen the chances of losing a shiny for any reason outside of user error. And while many will and are being resistant to the change, as is common with people, there's an entirely new take on what a Pokemon battle system can be. And as a fan of competitive games that aren't limited to Pokemon, this is the most exciting thing about Legends Z-A. And for all the people that love going through a Pokemon campaign, not only have the side missions in Z-A meaningfully added to the world and your experience playing the game, they add to the variety in gameplay opportunities, and they do so in a lot of ways that I believe are indicative of Pokemon's future. I plan to make a dedicated video about this concept in the coming weeks that you should be sure you get subscribed so that you see it when it goes up. Just know I think the anime vibes in this game are off the charts, and that is the key to the increased growth of the franchise overall. Part of that future is nearly fully realized, and to get into that, we'll have to dive deeper into the gameplay. The recurring theme of Z-A's gameplay for me is the idea that most things feel deeply considered and flow into each other in a way that culminates in an addicting gameplay loop, the likes of which I've never experienced in a Pokemon game. And the thing is, it's not what the game requires of you that's changed, but rather how it's done is what's been revolutionized here. Pokemon games have never been this considered with making the individual components of the experience this fun to engage with before. To its credit, Legends Arceus made the act of catching Pokemon deeper and more fun, but Legends Z-A retains most of what that game did for catching and added to that more meaningful objectives scattered throughout the world. Surprisingly fun puzzle platforming that's utilized to collect necessary items for upgrades to your trainer, like increased health to survive Pokemon attacks, increased prize money, increased experience gains, catching power, and Mega Shard collection. When I initially saw these platforming sections, I assumed they would be janky and frustrating, but in my opinion, they actually control surprisingly well, and I've had a lot of fun completing these platforming challenges. This isn't the first time Pokemon games have had fun gameplay opportunities outside of battles, but it is the first time something like it has simultaneously been fun, useful, and didn't actively overlevel your Pokemon. I hope we see them continue to go in this direction in future games, because it worked really well here. On a similar note, Legends Z-A pulls from several different genres and redefines them to fit the context of the Pokemon world to surprisingly great effect. This game is obviously an action RPG like it says on the box, but in addition to that, it has elements that are informed by puzzle platformers, collectathons, stealth games, cover shooters, and battle royale games, to name a few. Unfortunately, some tedious JRPG nonsense still plagues Legends Z-A, even if it's relatively rare. To be specific, Mega Shards are an unnecessary grind that break up the fluidity and overall fun of every other pillar of what is a well thought out, addicting gameplay loop. The day-night cycle execution is nearly perfect in this game, the mini-map serving as a clock that pulses when a shift to night or day occurs was a brilliant inclusion. The fact that despite the importance the game clearly wants to place on the Z-A Royale, you can completely ignore it entirely to continue on with whatever it is you want to do, all contributes to a gameplay loop the likes of which a Pokemon game has never seen or cared to offer. If I had to name a complaint, it's really just the jarring transition that reveals the shift between night and day. Even now that I've finished the game and research tasks, I still frequently get confused when my screen seemingly at random cuts to black. And it then takes me a second to remind myself of what's actually happening. And I say all of that, but the Z-A Royale itself has provided me endless amounts of fun that also serves as a godsend for accruing resources and completing relatively unrelated tasks. And the core to all of this is the new battle system, my absolute favorite part of this game, a change that many of you know I've been advocating for a long time. To be frank, this alone is a subject I fully intend to make a dedicated video on, and this one is already going to be far too long, so again, subscribe, click the notification bell even, all that good stuff. What I'll say here is the battle system is fun and has more depth than expected, and people are currently giving it credit for, but I think it absolutely has a lot of room to grow. Like, the lack of abilities is disappointing, especially given the potential to reinvent them for the new battle system as well. Also, the controls need work. Specifically, switching would be better if it was more seamless to cycle through your team while you move. Putting it on the D-pad doesn't really enable that. And we'll save the rest of my thoughts on this for that other video because I have way too much to say for this one. Let's move on to the story. And a shocking turn of events, the story in this game is pretty engaging and fleshed out when compared to every other Pokemon game. The dialogue is the strongest I've ever seen in a Pokemon game. The story has less predictable beats. The characters you meet throughout it are varied and all memorable. The sheer quantity of story content is nearly double the story content compared with Legends Arceus, and in my opinion, it's comprised of a lot less fluff and aimless scavenger hunts. And as far as I've seen so far, that remains true for the side missions. And I say so far because even after spending over 100 hours playing, it's still a major part of the game I have a ways to go on finishing, because in my quest to finish the game for this video and videos to come, as well as getting the shiny charm for, well, my own selfish desires to have a shiny Scrafty, I went out of my way to save the side missions for the end so I could have something relatively chill to do in handheld mode when I get the itch to play the game for the love of the game. I can say for the side missions I've done so far, I have enjoyed them and am excited to do more, which is big for me because I was not excited to even finish the main missions for Arceus at 50 hours in. It feels great being this high on this one and wanting to play through side missions at the 100-hour mark. I'm of the opinion that Pokemon Legends Arceus is amongst the least replayable games in the franchise, and that has a lot to do with why I dislike it as much as I do. I even tried replaying it before Z-A came out and couldn't force myself to see it through. Not only do I see hundreds of hours of playability in Legends Z-A, there's also actual multiplayer to increase that number even more. Contrary to the Pokemon fans online mourning the loss of the Link Cord evolution item, playing with friends and family is a key aspect of Pokemon games for me, and it always has been. So the fact that this game brings that back in a meaningful way with a battle system that's infinitely more fun to engage with means the world to me. I'm happy to know this new battle system made it a point to retain a lot of traditional Pokemon's existing competitive mechanics, despite the shift to a different, more engaging playstyle, because at first glance and based on the precedent Arceus set, there was no guarantee that things like EVs and IVs would return, or that we'd get staple held items like leftovers, assault vests, Rocky helmets, and more. As for some quick cons, I think there should be more multiplayer options. PvE modes like the raid battles from Gens 8 and 9 would be a perfect fit. More PvP options like single battles, multi-battles, etc. The rewards for playing the online mode are poorly balanced and paced, with the controversial Kalos Megastones being the absolute best you can get in the immediate future at K rank, but every rank after has subpar rewards for the rest of the season. In my opinion, they could stand to better incentivize playing after reaching rank A in the same way Master Ball rank is incentivized in other Pokemon games, by more precise ranking in that top tier, and arguably more consistent and better rewards for every match played. I intend to talk in depth about all of that in that battle system video. All of that said, ZA having a competitive mode with seasons that allude to rule changes and updates is very hype for me, because I am very interested in a potential rule set with more time and increased switch limits, 6v6, maybe even multi-battles down the line. That all has me very excited, and I hope we see it, whether that's through free updates or even the DLC. Speaking of which, I feel like a broken record, but I think I'm even more excited about the potential in ZA's future. We already know at minimum the game is set to receive DLC in the coming months, but even before that, for me, is the aforementioned potential for new experimental rule sets, and maybe even modes for online play. I see a world where we get 4-player mega raids, or like I mentioned, multi-battles as a ranked and private online battle option, or even singles and ranked. At any rate, there's a lot on the horizon to be excited about when it comes to this game. Check out my last Pokemon Legends Z-A video if you're feeling the Z-A hype and are looking for more videos about it. Thank you to paid members over at shop.watchredirect.com like Trev L. Steinberg for making this video possible. Hit the link in the description to join them in the credits of every video and in receiving physical and digital perks.